Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has kicked off his 4-day trip to India in what both countries describe as a potentially groundbreaking visit. This visit is expected to close a chapter of frosty relations and lay the groundwork for a comprehensive trade deal. Back at home, Canada's Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, has a differing vision to Carney and believes in a strategy for Canada-US relations in a Trumpian era. To tell us more about this, I'm pleased to welcome Lukaszuk, former member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. Hello, and thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's begin with Mark Carney and his Davos speech that left quite the mark in Davos this year. What was the message that he presented that appeared to resonate with actually quite a broad international audience?
I think Prime Minister Carney said what a lot of world leaders were thinking, but did not dare to say, that the world order has changed. The relationship between Western nations has realigned. And it is time now to look at new relationships in markets that are not traditional, both from an economic, but also from a defense and political perspective. So after frosty relationship with China, frosty relationship with India, Prime Minister Carney has visited both countries and is engaging in new economic trade, very much engaging with the European Union on defense and opening up that market as well. So it's an external and internal realignment in Canada. Our economy is going through a metamorphosis like the one during World War II, where self-reliance and there never will be an independence, but irrelevant independence from the United States. This is the goal.
And how was Carney's speech received in Canada?
Very well, very well. We have to put this in perspective. Prime Minister Carney is the leader of a Liberal party, a party that was destined to lose the last election following the change of leadership from Prime Minister Trudeau to Prime Minister Carney. A party that was lagging by 20% in all polls has managed to win and re-establish itself on a world stage. So you will often hear Canadians who are conservatives, not Liberals, conservatives, saying, I am Mark Carney, conservative. So he has managed to actually bring both of the polar opposites, conservatives and liberals, into one tent, because his politics from an economic perspective is considered to be conservative, and yet he satisfies liberals with his social policies.
So are you saying that he is a unifying force in
Very
the times
much,
that we live in?
Very much so. At a time of polarized politics, maybe not so much in Canada as we see worldwide, but yes, very much a unifying force.
Now, does the Canadian Prime Minister believe that Canada needs to create this so-called new political and economic bloc, shall we say, that actually counters Donald Trump's volatility, especially when it comes to the unpredictability that he brings in regionally for North America and also on the international stage?
Most definitely. He refers to it as a new world order, and that's exactly what it is. The alliances of the last few decades, or actually since probably the collapse of USSR, no longer apply. So now we see a much closer relationship between Canada and European Union, and based on values, Canada by far is closer to European Union than United States. We're opening up our markets. We know that we can be a reliable source of natural resources to large economies like China, India, and European Union, and that does not mean that we forgo United States. There still is a hope that we will re-establish good relationships with the United States, but as Prime Minister Carney says, they will never be the same again. This is a new world order and an opportunity to forge alliances with partners who perhaps had a frosty relationship up to now.
But you say that Canada has a lot in common with Europe, but nonetheless, Canada and the US are very much intertwined. So when it comes to this new world order, what does that strategy mean for Canada as a country?
So of course, our economies are integrated. Canada is the biggest purchaser of all American products and vice versa. And up to recently, we had a free trade agreement duty-free exchange of goods of all kinds. What you're seeing in Canada right now is focus on opening up new markets. So, for example, construction of pipelines to the Pacific and to the Atlantic, whereas up to now, approximately 95% of Canada's energy production was exclusively purchased by United States. So, diversifying that market and competing on the international stage with energy. We're looking at constructing shipyards, for example. So those are moves that were not previously considered. So, as polarizing as President Trump has been, he has also had a mobilizing, a positive effect on Canada, a somewhat of an awakening, political awakening in Canada, bringing us to the realization that having one reliable customer perhaps is not a good thing in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to move on to Canada's opposition leader, Pierre Poilievre, who takes on a different approach. But before we get into the details, I just wanted to listen to a soundbite from him.
Canada's prosperity and security are inseparable from a stable relationship with the United States. And that is why we should not declare a permanent rupture with our biggest customer and closest neighbor in favor of a strategic partnership for a new world order with Beijing.
So he sounds quite pragmatic, not too extreme. I mean, what are your thoughts, given that you actually live in Canada?
Domestic politics play a role over here. As you know, he lost his own seat in the last election. He was leading by 20% and was destined to be the prime minister. So he is now speaking to his more fundamental base within the Conservative Party, and there is a MAGA overlap in Canada. More far-right, radical contingents of his political party want this kind of a message. They are very much still attached to the United States, and abandoning the United States is something that is not aligning well with his political base. Having said that, he must realize that the fact is that President Trump is very unpredictable at this point in time, and Canada must take control of its own destiny, and by doing so, we must forge new markets abroad. This is more of a political than an economic statement. The Conservative Party has been marginalized by Prime Minister Carney, and it is a party now in a search of a new role and a new message, overshadowed by this sudden stardom of Prime Minister Carney. So I am not surprised to hear this message, but here in Poland, there is an analogy. You will find that the far more right-leaning parties still are yearning to maintain status quo and to establish or re-establish the same relationship with the United States. But you can't step into the same river twice. Times have changed. Relationships have changed, and much like Poland and Canada, we simply have to accept the fact that we need to realign, we need to diversify our markets, and we need to transform our domestic economies to be more open and more pliable to developing new markets.
Absolutely, but I digress a little bit. But if Pierre Poilievre was 20% ahead, what happened? If he was destined to be the Prime Minister, what happened?
Combinations of things. Number one, he was running a very negative campaign. And this attachment to Trump, while Trump was referring to the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, as a governor as opposed to Prime Minister, referring to Canada as a 51st state, demeaning the nationhood and the sovereignty of Canada. The Conservative Party still wanted to maintain status quo. Prime Minister Carney was the answer to that situation. His statement was elbows up, borrowing from a hockey analogy and saying, we don't need to be demeaned by United States. We can still be friends. We can work towards a good relationship. But in the meantime, we can be the masters of our own destiny. And that captured the Canadian imagination, where Canadians, out of their own volition, started boycotting American products. waving Canadian flags, and this healthy form of patriotism has erupted in Canada, and that wave carried Prime Minister Carney into prime ministership, and he seems to be still enjoying that popularity. The honeymoon is not over yet.
Now, just going back to Mark Carney's trip to India, how do Canada's business leaders view that trip, and what is the likelihood that a comprehensive trade deal with India will be signed?
From an economic perspective, it's welcomed. There is a political consideration. Canada had very frosty diplomatic relations with India following an assassination of a Canadian in Canada, which may have been sanctioned by the Indian government. The position that Prime Minister Carney and our current Liberal government takes is that if we are to impact foreign policies of other countries, if we are to improve human rights in other countries, we will have more leverage doing business with them and then using that as a leverage than simply shunning those nations and hoping that they change by themselves. So there is a definite strategic political shift that is not well received by all Canadians, but at a time where President Trump is posing a real threat, we are willing to give Prime Minister Carney a chance to develop that new market.
Sure, and now Carney's also visiting Australia and Japan during this trip abroad. What does he want to achieve there, and how successful do you think that time abroad will be?
Much the same. Those are potential markets for Canadian natural resources. So development of market. These are major economies which Canada has been ignoring for decades. Why? Because we didn't need them. The United States was ready and willing to purchase 100% of everything that we produce in Canada. Now that no longer is the case, we need to start paying attention to these other large markets throughout the world that have the potential of becoming both importers and exporters to Canada, and not necessarily replace United States, but simply be an alternative.
You say an alternative, but what is the likelihood, given that you mentioned 75% going both ways? It'll take a long time to be less dependent.
Sure it will, but you have to start somewhere. And this is a good beginning that seems to be well received. Particularly, I see a lot of hope in increased relationship between Canada and the European Union. A value-based relationship where we can be very compatible economically, but also politically.
Okay, Tomasz Lukaszuk, former member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure, thank you.
And that's a wrap for World Talks this evening. Thank you so much for being with us, and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.